Today, our service does not have a sermon per se. Ours is actually an offering in 4 acts. And I've titled them, if you look on the order of service, they have these titles. Freedom Without, a refugee story. Freedom Within, a story of inner healing. The freedom yet to come, a reminder that none of us are free until all of us are free. And then to conclude with the path of freedom and discover what is ours to do. So our first reflection comes from our dear friend, Blessing, who I'm honored that is a graduate from the youth program and has actually now come to help me deliver the youth program to a new year and a new generation of learners. She is an extraordinary young woman whose story she'll share with you now, I'm sure in part. Suffice to say that she herself and her family are refugees, and they came from the Democratic Republic of Congo and found a home here in South Africa. And Blessing is a constant inspiration to me and so many of my colleagues for her hard work and determination to make a life for herself despite being very, very far away from home. Blessing, thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Blessing and I graduated from Interfaith last year. I was born in DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I came here with my family in the year 2012. So a little bit about how it all started. I remember back in the days when I was still in Congo, there were days where I was 5 years old, where you hear gunshots and violence. And the first thing that always came to my mind when I'd hear a gunshot or, violence going around, around me was hide under the table, because we all knew that, when there's gunshots, when there's war around you, be safe, hide under the table. As a 5-year-old, knowing that, it's scary, but then you have to protect yourself, and you're protected, but you can still get harmed. So my dad came to South Africa and he left us behind, and he fought, he worked 5 jobs, just so that he can make an income and send back home so my mom can find a way for my 3 siblings and I to come here. It wasn't easy living behind a place you called home. It is still home to me, even though this is my home now. Living behind your grandmas, your grandpas, your cousins, your aunts, the friends you made, and everything else that you called home. And with that, I wrote a little something, like always. I wrote a poem called Let Us Live. Where darkness lies, let love bring light. Let not our hearts be stained with hate, but brim with empathy. My grandfather always said, if you do not feel my love, let me know. Let me know, and I'll find whatever that is within me and connect with whatever lies within you. Let us love whatever that stands against us. Thank you, Papa. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to God, who has made this time for me to be here in your presence. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Blessing. If ever anyone lived up to their name, it's you. And now we're going to explore freedom that is yet to come. And Zabada is going to share a brief reflection with us. Zabada.
Freedom, a word that holds so much power of exploration. But am I really free? Reflecting back to my childhood, being raised with an indigenous identity, even though I never had the privilege to explore it. And having the surname, January, the surname of a slave. Many foreigners or people outside South Africa probably had the impression 94, 95, when South Africa achieved full freedom, because that is what we fought for, full freedom, so that everybody can enjoy the privileges that Mother Earth has to offer. Us as Indigenous people weren't given that freedom. As a child, growing up in the apartheid era, living close to the beach, I never really, before I was a teenager, had this opportunity to explore freedom of the beach, freedom of feeling the sand under my feet. So I thought that freedom would be, I'm free. I can conquer the world. I can love my identity. I can love myself. Didn't happen that way. If I have to give you an example, I had 1 foot in the seawater that was free, and the other foot was on the pavement that could not reach the freedom of the ocean's water. But I had to free my mind because I've got my ancestors that I need to fight for all of our freedom. I don't know how to put this in perfect words for you, but on a spiritual level, I connect, and I've got a mission in front of me. And that mission is so that my people can also experience true freedom, experience the true identity, experience and feel and have the privilege to learn the language, to learn the culture, to be who the Creator or Great Spirit has intended them to be, to connect to our land, to reconnect to our land. So that is the freedom me and a whole lot of other people in different tribes are striving for. And I do know that my story is not just something that happened here in South Africa, but you can link all our stories together. We all have the same story, but freedom we're gonna feel very soon. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. It's so lovely to be here again with all of you. I just wanted to mention freedom, the idea of freedom, what we just heard now and we've spoken about. the freedom to be what? To be the full expression of yourself on this earth, I think is a clear freedom. How do we come to live the life we have our purpose, and how do we come to live the life we're meant to live? And I think for me, that's always been, how do you get freed internally so that you're able to live your purpose in a way that is true to yourself and gives into the world in a form of service. So this is a quandary and a conundrum which is carried on over one's whole life in some ways. How do I live to full expression? And what I would wish for each of you is to be able to live each day to full expression of who you are meant to be on this earth. So it starts off, of course, with your true nature. Who were you born to be? And that, I think, is shown in the things that are natural to you, things that you are good at, things that you love doing. And I think that's a key thing. We follow what we love doing. And if we love doing it, then it's actually part of our gifting usually, and that we follow that. So this idea of coming and sitting at the center of yourself and living the life that feels that it's going through you and expanding out in a way that feels really true. And of course, in that process, it's joy. Joy will always come when you're living in a free place of living with your full purpose. I was just thinking of what has been the process internally for me. And I think there were a few key moments which I'd just like to cover. One of them was I came from a spiritual Christian root. It was a Christian root. I now feel like I've kind of got my root as a Christian, but I've got this wider, broad view of spirituality, which is much bigger now at the top. But my root remains in the Christian tradition originally. And the Christian tradition, I think, comes down to the very basic thing of Christ died. He died with a lot of suffering. There was a lot of suffering in the way he laid down his life. Then there was this kind of waiting time where we didn't know what was going on. And then through that, there was almost like a transmutation of that suffering, and there's a resurrected return. And I think that in some way, those are symbols of how we live. It's a feeling of with wherever my suffering is, I lay it down with suffering. I come down, lay something down with suffering. And usually our suffering is our teaching point. Then there's this movement where it goes underground and you don't actually know what's happened with that, but you've released it in some form. And then it comes back to you resurrected in a way that you couldn't expect. And I've seen that over and over in different ways in my life. I'd say there are three things that have really been unlocking into where I feel I am now. One would be the feeling of I give my life away. In my spiritual journey as a Christian, there was a certain point of conversion where I say, I lay my life down and I will follow you. I will follow what I feel is a greater intelligence, a greater understanding of how I should live my life. So there's this great sense of relinquishment. And that key thing of relinquishment, I give over, I give down, I place down, feels very key to how we get liberated. It's always these paradoxes. So on the one level, it was the laying down. So I remember that Christian moment, that moment in my Christian walk where I did the laying down. And then I felt flooded by an access to a wider, bigger intelligence at that moment, which we would have called the Holy Spirit. It felt like I could sense and see and connect to things that I hadn't before. It was like an expansion. The second thing, as I started to grow and become bigger than just that, was I got attacked. I was working in a literacy project in Alex Township in Johannesburg. It was just in the middle of apartheid. It was in a very violent time of apartheid in the 80s. It was just before apartheid was kind of put to the side a bit, if you can ever put apartheid to the side. But and I got attacked. I got attacked twice in 1 week. And the feeling of being attacked, even though I escaped, it was like my life went right to the edge of living. I was probably about 24. I was right at the edge of living with this cliff face. And I'd had to go to the edge and then I'd had to come back. And there was a deep grieving of that process, this trauma that had happened. But I always believe that suffering transmutes, that if you're working with it well, it turns into something else. It becomes insight or strength or clarity, or it gives you something if you work with it well. So that incident actually helped me to, first of all, understand about trauma of the body, how it responds, how you close down, how you shrink. It helped me understand that it will repeat over time as the same circumstances come, how I feel the same sort of burst of anxiety or something like that. So it will repeat. And that it eventually will become a teaching point. It becomes something that's given you a richness of some sort, which wouldn't have expected. And I now work as a trauma counselor. The second thing was my mother being a refugee, herself a refugee, fleeing in the middle of the night from France, coming to South Africa, and her not being able to do the work of the refugee, which can be often too big. And then my feeling like a refugee. So having to take on the work of the generation behind me and do the emotional work of what hadn't been able to be done. And again, it was a kind of, how do I process it? How do I take something that's suffering and transmute it into something else? So that something that is difficult becomes like the golden thread, becomes something that gives possibility, it gives an opening, and it gives an expansion of consciousness and understanding. And it gives you compassion. So you start to expand in your ability to be compassionate. And then the third thing that has happened very recently for me is that I've been diagnosed with breast cancer. And even though that feels like a big thing, it's stage 1, so it's early and it's slow growing, thank God. But I've had to go through a double mastectomy. So excuse my tears, but it's part of what I'm wanting to show. The tears, salt water. And this is my third learning. This is my third taking of something that feels very physical. It feels very feminine. And how do I transmute it? And the thing that is so interesting about this time is that it is transmutable. I don't know what the outcome will be, but if I'm lying in the ward with one nurse and I connect well to that one nurse in that one moment in present time, I am I'm living my life well in that moment. And I came down to bringing everything into what is in front of me. How can I live this one moment well? What are the possibilities of expansion? How can love and compassion expand this moment into something different? And how can I move through it and hold this situation well? And I hold it well as best I can. It's not always well, but I hold it well as best I can for myself and for my daughters and for my family and for those who love me and who I love. And we see where it goes. But the possibilities are for it to again transmute and shift and bring me to something that is more expansive, clarifying, strengthening, integrous. Everything can be resurrected is my final word. Thank you so much. Freedom within.
Thank you, Anne. I number myself among those lucky to love you. I want to close this journey of freedom with 3 very short questions. The first one is, what do the children ask? The next one is, what can we add to the Seder plate? And the third one is, next year. So very quickly, for those who observe Seder, and I've done many, I've been very blessed to have done many over the years, the 4 questions that became very familiar to me were always asked by the children. And I think it's an important thing that it's not just the older people that get to ask the questions, but there's space at the table for the younger generations to ask the questions. It keeps the conversation fresh and moving and relevant and in revolution. The questions that I learned were this: why dip twice? I learned a beautiful thing yesterday, in fact. I didn't realize this, but Hillel, the great rabbi and teacher of the 1st century, I believe it was the 1st century, said that he would put the bitter of the Seder plate on the matzah with the sweet. They nicknamed it yesterday Hillel's sandwich. And I thought, why dip twice? Because it's a reminder to all of us of this bitter sweetness of this journey that we call life. And we've heard it through what Blessing has shared, and Zabada and Anne. Why no bread? Let us find more and more ways to remember those who are without, and do what we can to bring equity and justice. Why the bitter herbs? May we strive in everything we do to bring sweetness with our words and with our deeds. I remember walking with the group of young people last year towards the Dutch Reformed Church, the oldest, one of three of the oldest buildings in Cape Town. And there were planted around the church slave trees, as they were known, where people would walk past and they would buy their slaves. And of course, the slave trees lined up towards the entrance of the church. And now, with our 21st century mind, we think, how on earth could that be possible? How could people walk to church past people chained and for sale under the shade of a tree? And Rian, the leader of the church, said, that was then, and that was almost normal, acceptable in those days. And his challenge to us was, what do we walk past every day and accept as normal on our way to doing our attendance of church or the everyday? Finally, why don't we recline? Because we must sit up and take notice. As Rumi said, don't go back to sleep. That we must notice what is within and weed our own gardens, and notice what is without and challenge the status quo. And I asked another question, which is what to add to the Seder plate. So many of you probably remember Khani, who spoke to you last year. She wrote a beautiful blog and shared it with me. And in it, she said that they were adding to the Seder plate a number of items. And the one that she reflected on was the seashell. And Debbie, I have a feeling this might be familiar to you if I think you're at Lab Shul. And it was a reminder that this year, with all that is swirling around us, that perhaps we want to listen more than speak, and to honor the fact that we were all holding truths, that we're all in pain, that we all in our own way are devastated by what's happening in our world. Part of the Exodus, of course, happened in water, so a shell is a reminder of liberation, not just in the past, but also for today. And in order to hear the sound of the water in the shell, we must offer each other and ourselves a moment of silence and pause long enough to actually listen, and listen deeply to one another and to what's going on in the depths of our hearts. And we can only hear that when we're quiet, and we can only hear each other when we actually stop and listen. And so finally, to round up our time with you today, the question that came landing in my lap yesterday, and I wanted to share with you because it's a deep, deep question. Next year, where? Where would you like to be next year? What do you want, and what do you want to be? Thank you, everybody.
If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.